The gunshot that echoed through the canyon walls that August evening in 1873 sent Patrick Thompson diving behind a cluster of boulders near the Colorado River, his heart hammering against his ribs as he waited for the second shot that never came. When silence returned except for the rushing water and the distant call of a hawk, Patrick slowly emerged from his cover, his hand resting on the worn handle of his revolver, scanning the rocky terrain around the river's edge in the fading light. He had been tracking a wounded mare for the better part of 3 hours, following her trail from his ranch outside Austin, Texas. And now, he found himself far from familiar territory as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Patrick moved carefully along the riverbank, his boots crunching on the loose stones, when he heard something that made him freeze completely. It was a sound so raw and filled with such grief that it seemed to blend with the river itself, a crying that spoke of loss deeper than any wound. He approached slowly, pushing aside the tall grass and mesquite branches until he saw her there on the bank, a young Apache woman curled on her side in the mud, her buckskin dress torn and stained with blood that did not appear to be her own. Her face was buried in her hands, and her entire body shook with sobs that tore from her throat in waves. Patrick felt his chest tighten at the sight, all thoughts of the missing mare forgotten. He knew the dangers of approaching anyone in these parts without caution, especially given the tensions between the settlers and the Apache tribes, but something in her anguish called to something deep within him that he could not ignore. "Miss," he called out softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you hurt?" The young woman's head snapped up, and Patrick found himself looking into the most striking pair of dark eyes he had ever seen, wide with fear and red from crying. She scrambled backward, her hand reaching for something at her waist, but whatever weapon she might have carried was no longer there. Her long black hair hung loose around her shoulders, tangled with bits of grass and mud, and her face was streaked with dirt and tears. "I am not going to hurt you," Patrick said, keeping his voice low and steady. He slowly raised his hands to show they were empty, though his gun remained holstered at his hip. "My name is Patrick Thompson. I have a ranch near Austin. You understand English?" The woman stared at him for a long moment, her breathing rapid and shallow. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse from crying, but her English was clear though heavily accented. "Go away." "You are hurt or in trouble," Patrick said, taking a careful step closer. "The blood on your dress." "What happened?" "Not my blood," she whispered, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "My brother's blood. My father's blood." Her voice broke on the last word, and she wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold the pieces together. Patrick felt his heart sink. He had heard stories of raids and counter-raids, of violence breeding more violence in an endless cycle that seemed to have no end. "I am sorry," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "Were you attacked? Are the people who did this still nearby?" She shook her head violently. "You would not understand. Your people never understand." The bitterness in her voice was sharp as a knife blade, but beneath it, Patrick could hear the exhaustion and grief. "Try me," Patrick said gently. He moved closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance, and crouched down so he was not towering over her. "What is your name?" She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether he was worth the risk of trust. Finally, she said, "Grace." "My mother gave me that name when the missionaries came. She thought it would protect me. It did not protect her either." "Grace," Patrick repeated, and the name seemed to fit her despite the circumstances. "Grace what?" "Grace Kessay. It means the cold one in my father's tongue." She laughed bitterly. "Though he called me Gentle Doe, because I could never kill even a rabbit without crying." Patrick felt something shift in his chest at her words. Will you tell me what happened, Grace? She looked away toward the river, her jaw working as if she was fighting back more tears. There was a raid 3 days ago. White men came to our camp while most of our warriors were away hunting. They killed many people. They took horses, supplies, everything. My mother died trying to protect the children. Her voice had gone flat, as if the emotion had been wrung out of her. When my father and brother returned, they were filled with rage. They wanted revenge. They gathered warriors and went to attack a settlement. I begged them not to go. I told them it would only bring more death, but they would not listen. What happened to them? Patrick asked quietly. I followed them, Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought maybe I could stop them or warn the settlers or something, anything to prevent more killing. But when I got there, it was already too late. The settlers had been warned somehow. They were waiting. My father and brother were shot down before they could even reach the buildings. I tried to run to them, but one of our own warriors grabbed me and threw me on a horse. He said if I died too, my family line would be ended. He sent me away. Tears were flowing freely down her face now, and Patrick felt his own eyes burning. So you came here to the river? I did not know where else to go, Grace said. I cannot go back to my people. They will say I am cursed, that I brought bad luck to my father and brother by following them. And I cannot go to the white settlements. They would kill me or worse for being Apache. She looked at him with such raw vulnerability that Patrick felt something crack open inside him. So I came here to decide whether to walk into the water and let the river take me. No, Patrick said firmly. The word came out harder than he intended, and he softened his tone. You cannot do that. Your life has value, Grace. What happened to your family is a terrible tragedy, but ending your own life would not honor their memory. What would you have me do? Grace asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. I have nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I am alone in a world that wants me dead. Patrick thought quickly. He knew what he was about to suggest was dangerous and possibly foolish, but he could not simply leave her here to die. Come with me, he said. Back to my ranch. You can rest there, get cleaned up, have a proper meal. We can figure out what to do next once you have had time to grieve and think clearly. Grace looked at him as if he had lost his mind. You would bring an Apache woman to your home. After everything that has happened, your people would hang you for harboring the enemy. Let me worry about that, Patrick said. Right now, you need help and I am offering it. No strings attached. You can leave whenever you want, but at least give yourself a chance to survive this. She studied his face for a long time, searching for deception or ulterior motives. Patrick met her gaze steadily, letting her see the sincerity in his eyes. Finally, she nodded slowly. Why would you help me? You do not know me. I could be dangerous. You could be, Patrick agreed. But right now, you are a woman in pain who needs help. That is all I need to know. He stood and offered her his hand. Can you ride? Grace took his hand and Patrick felt a jolt at the contact, her skin cold despite the warm evening air. She rose unsteadily to her feet, swaying slightly. I can ride. My horse is just up the bank, Patrick said. It is going to be dark soon and we should get moving before the night predators come out. They made their way up the rocky slope to where Patrick's gelding, a sturdy buckskin named Ranger, was tied to a scrub oak. The horse whickered softly as they approached, and Patrick gathered the reins. It is going to be a tight fit with both of us, but he can handle it. It is about a 2-hour ride back to the ranch. Patrick mounted first, then reached down to help Grace up behind him. She hesitated for just a moment, before accepting his help, settling onto the horse's back with practiced ease despite her emotional state. She kept a careful distance between them at first, barely touching him, but as they started moving and the motion of the horse jostled them together, she had no choice but to hold on. They rode in silence for the first hour, making their way through the darkening landscape. Patrick was acutely aware of Grace's presence behind him, the way her hands gripped his jacket, the sound of her breathing gradually steadying as they put distance between them and the river. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the scrubland and making navigation easier. "Thank you," Grace said suddenly, her voice soft near his ear, "for not leaving me there." "You do not need to thank me," Patrick replied. "Any decent person would have done the same." "That is not true," Grace said with a sad laugh. "Most of your people would have shot me on sight or left me to die, and most of my people would have killed you for finding me alone. The world is not as full of decent people as you seem to think." Patrick could not argue with that. He had seen enough cruelty in his 30 years to know she was right. "Then maybe we should try to be the exception," he said. They fell back into silence, but it felt more comfortable now, less weighted with fear and uncertainty. As they crested a low hill, Patrick could see the lights of his ranch in the distance, the small house he had built with his own hands over the past 5 years glowing like a beacon in the darkness. "That is my home," he said, pointing toward the lights. "It is not much, but it is solid and safe." Grace leaned slightly to see around him, and Patrick felt her tense. "You live alone." "I do," Patrick confirmed. "My parents died of fever when I was 25, left me the land and some cattle. I have been building it up ever since. I have a couple of ranch hands who come during the day to help with the work, but they go home to their families at night. So no one will know I am there," Grace said, understanding. "Not unless I tell them," Patrick said. "And I would not do that without your permission. Though I will have to come up with some explanation if you decide to stay for any length of time. People notice things." They reached the ranch as the night deepened, the sounds of cattle lowing in the distance and the chirp of crickets filling the air. Patrick helped Grace down from the horse first, then dismounted himself. He could see her looking around, taking in the simple wooden house, the barn, the corral where several horses dozed. "Let me get Ranger settled, then I will show you inside," Patrick said. He led the horse toward the barn, and Grace followed, staying close as if afraid to be left alone even for a moment. Patrick worked quickly, removing the saddle and bridle, checking Ranger's hooves, and making sure he had fresh water and hay. Grace watched him work with quiet attention, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill that had crept into the night air. When he was finished, Patrick led her to the house. He pushed open the door and gestured for her to enter first. The interior was simple but comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area in one corner, and 2 doors that led to a bedroom and a small storage room. Everything was neat and well maintained, the work of a man who lived alone but took pride in his space. "You can sleep in the bedroom," Patrick said, moving to light a few lamps. "I will make up a pallet out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Grace protested. "You have already done too much." "I insist," Patrick said firmly. "You have been through a trauma, you need proper rest." He moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out supplies. "When did you last eat?" Grace thought about it. 2 days ago, maybe, I am not sure. Time has felt strange." Patrick's jaw tightened. "Well, we will fix that right now. Sit down at the table while I make something." Grace obeyed, sinking into one of the simple wooden chairs as if her legs could no longer hold her. Patrick worked efficiently, building up the fire in the stove and preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and bacon. As the food cooked, he heated water for tea and set the table with quiet care. When he placed the plate in front of her, Grace stared at it for a long moment before picking up the fork with trembling hands. She took a small bite, then another, and suddenly she was eating with desperate hunger, as if her body had just remembered its needs. Patrick sat across from her with his own plate. eating more slowly and trying not to stare at her in the lamplight. With some of the mud wiped away, he could see that Grace was probably close to his own age, maybe a year or two younger. Her features were fine and striking, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw that spoke of resilience. Despite the grief and exhaustion that shadowed her face, there was an underlying beauty that took his breath away. When she had finished eating, Patrick poured her tea and watched as she wrapped her hands around the warm cup, her eyes closing for a moment in what looked like relief. "Thank you," she said again. "I did not realize how hungry I was." "Grief does that sometimes," Patrick said. "Makes you forget everything else." He hesitated, then added, "My mother used to say that the body has its own wisdom. Sometimes it makes you eat or sleep when your heart wants to do nothing but hurt." Grace looked at him with something like surprise. "Your mother sounds like she was wise." "She was," Patrick said with a small smile. "She was the strongest person I ever knew, raised me and my two sisters on the frontier while my father was away fighting in the war. When he came back broken and bitter, she held us all together until the fever took her and him both." His voice grew quiet. "I understand loss, Grace. Maybe not exactly like yours, but I understand the weight of it." They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping their tea. Finally, Patrick said, "There is a pump out back where you can wash up if you like. And I think I might have some clothes that could work for you. They will be too big, but better than what you are wearing now." Grace looked down at her blood-stained dress and nodded. "I would like that." Patrick showed her to the pump and gave her a bar of soap, a cloth, and a towel. He went back inside to give her privacy and rummaged through his trunk until he found an old shirt and a pair of trousers that had belonged to his father. They would be enormous on Grace's slender frame, but they were clean and whole. When Grace came back inside, her long hair was wet and slicked back from her face, and she looked somehow younger and more vulnerable without the mud and blood. Patrick handed her the clothes and pointed to the bedroom. "You can change in there. I will be out here if you need anything." She took the clothes with a nod and disappeared into the bedroom. When she emerged a few minutes later, Patrick had to suppress a smile. The shirt hung on her like a dress, and she had rolled the trouser legs up several times so she would not trip. She looked ridiculous and beautiful all at once. "I know I look strange," Grace said, but there was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. "You look warm and clean," Patrick said diplomatically. "That is what matters." He gestured to the bedroom. "There are extra blankets on the bed if you get cold. Try to get some rest. We can talk more in the morning about what you want to do." Grace looked like she wanted to say something more, but instead she just nodded and returned to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Patrick stood there for a moment, listening to the sounds of her moving around, then set about making his own sleeping arrangements by the fire. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and wondering what he had gotten himself into. Harboring an Apache woman on his ranch when tensions were so high was beyond foolish. If anyone found out, he could lose everything he had built, maybe even his life. But when he thought about Grace's tear-streaked face by the river, about the raw grief in her voice, he knew he had made the only choice he could live with. In the bedroom, Grace lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the darkness. She could hear Patrick moving around in the other room, the creak of floorboards and the rustle of blankets. She should feel afraid, alone with a white man in his home with no one to protect her. But instead, she felt something she had not expected. She felt safe. And that was perhaps the strangest thing of all. When she finally slept, her dreams were troubled but not nightmares. She dreamed of her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair, of her brother's laugh as he taught her to track deer, of her father's strong arms lifting her onto her first horse. When she woke in the gray light of pre-dawn, tears were streaming down her face, but they felt cleaner somehow, as if crying in safety was different than crying in despair. She rose quietly and opened the bedroom door a crack. Patrick was already awake, standing at the kitchen counter and preparing coffee. He must have heard her because he turned and gave her a small nod. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Grace admitted. She stepped fully into the room, suddenly self-conscious in the oversized clothes. "What time is it?" "Just after dawn," Patrick said. "My ranch hands will be arriving in about an hour. I was thinking you might want to stay in the bedroom until they leave for the day. They are good men, but I do not want to put you at risk by having too many people know you are here." Grace nodded, understanding the wisdom in this. "What will you tell them if they ask questions?" "I will tell them I am not feeling well and need to rest today," Patrick said. "They can handle the basic work without me for one day. Tomorrow we will figure out something better." He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "But first, we need to talk about what you want to do. You cannot hide here forever, Grace. We need to think about your future." Grace took the coffee and wrapped her hands around the warm cup, a gesture that was already becoming familiar. "I have been thinking about that all night. I do not know what my options are. I cannot go back to my people. Even if they would accept me, which I doubt, it would only put them at risk. The army is always looking for excuses to raid Apache camps." "What about family?" Patrick asked. "Anyone who might take you in?" Grace shook her head. "My mother's people are all dead. Disease took most of them years ago. My father's brothers are with Kachai's band far to the west. I would never make it that far on my own, and even if I did, they might not welcome me. They are at war." Patrick sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "What about going somewhere completely new? A city where no one knows you are Apache. You speak English well. You could pass for Mexican or Spanish, perhaps." "And do what?" Grace asked. "I have no money, no skills that would matter in a city. I can track and hunt and prepare hides, but those things have no value in white society." She laughed bitterly. "I am very good at digging roots and making medicine from plants, but that would probably get me accused of witchcraft." "You are smart and you are strong," Patrick said firmly. "Those things have value anywhere. We just need to figure out how to use them." He paused, then said carefully, "What if you stayed here for a while? Just until you get your strength back and we can come up with a better plan." Grace looked at him searchingly. "Why would you risk that? If anyone finds out, you could lose everything." "I know the risks," Patrick said. "But I cannot in good conscience send you away when I know you have nowhere safe to go. We will be careful. We will make it work." He met her eyes. "Unless you do not trust me, I would understand that." "It is not that I do not trust you," Grace said slowly. "You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect, but I do not want to be the cause of your ruin, Patrick Thompson." The way she said his full name made something warm bloom in Patrick's chest. "Let me worry about that," he said. "For now, let us take things one day at a time. Today, you rest and recover. Tomorrow, we start figuring out the future." They heard the sound of horses approaching, and Grace quickly retreated to the bedroom, taking her coffee with her. Patrick went outside to greet his ranch hands, 2 brothers named Tom and Sam Wilcox who had worked for him for 3 years. They were solid, dependable men in their 40s, with families of their own. "Morning, boss," Tom called out, dismounting from his horse. "You are up early." "Could not sleep much," Patrick said, which was true enough. "Listen, I am not feeling my best today. Think I might have eaten something that disagreed with me. Can you 2 handle things without me?" Sam studied him with a concerned expression. "You look a bit peaked at that." "Nothing serious, I hope. Just need a day of rest," Patrick assured him. "Check on the cattle in the north pasture and make sure the fence line is holding. I saw some coyote tracks yesterday." The brothers nodded and set about their work. Patrick stayed outside for a while, doing small tasks around the barn to maintain the appearance of normalcy. But his mind was constantly on Grace in the house, and he found himself inventing excuses to go back inside to check on her. When the ranch hands finally left as the sun was high in the sky, Patrick knocked softly on the bedroom door. "They are gone. You can come out now." Grace emerged looking restless. "I am not used to being inside for so long. My people spend most of our time outside." "There is a small garden behind the house," Patrick said. "It is hidden from the main path. You could sit out there if you want. Get some sun." They spent the afternoon in the garden, where Patrick grew vegetables and herbs. Grace's eyes lit up when she saw the plants, and she knelt down to examine them with gentle, knowing fingers. "This is good earth," she said. "You have sage and mint. Do you use them for medicine?" "My mother did," Patrick said. "I just kept the garden going out of habit, but I do not really know what half these plants do." Grace smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face, making her look younger and less burdened. "My mother taught me about plants. This one here, with the small white flowers, is good for headaches, and this one helps with stomach troubles." She moved through the garden, touching each plant like an old friend. "You have treasures here and do not even know it." Patrick found himself smiling too, caught up in her enthusiasm. "Maybe you could teach me. I would like to know what my mother knew." They spent hours in the garden, with Grace explaining the properties of different plants while Patrick listened and asked questions. He found himself fascinated not just by the information, but by the way Grace's whole demeanor changed when she talked about something she loved. The grief was still there, hovering at the edges, but for those few hours it seemed to recede enough to let her breathe. As evening approached, Patrick made dinner while Grace set the table. There was something strangely domestic about it, something that made Patrick's chest feel tight. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to share a meal and a conversation with someone, to have another person's presence fill the empty spaces of his home. "Tell me about your family," Grace said as they ate. "You mentioned sisters. Where are they now?" "Both married and moved east," Patrick said. "Elizabeth went to St. Louis and Mary is in Atlanta. We write letters, but I have not seen them in person in 3 years." He felt a pang of loneliness at the admission. "They wanted me to come with them to leave the ranch and start over somewhere safer. But this land is all I have left of my parents. I could not leave it." "I understand that," Grace said softly. "Connection to the land is important. My people believe the land is not something you own but something you belong to, that you are part of it and it is part of you." She looked down at her plate. "That is why it hurts so much to be driven from it, to watch it be taken and divided and fenced. It is like losing pieces of yourself." They talked long into the night, sharing stories about their childhoods, their families, their beliefs. Patrick found himself opening up in ways he never had before, telling Grace things he had never told anyone. And Grace, despite her grief, seemed to find some comfort in the sharing, in being heard and understood. When they finally retired for the night, Patrick lay by the fire and thought about how much his life had changed in just one day. He had always been a solitary person, content with his own company and his work. But now, knowing Grace was sleeping in the next room, he felt a strange sense of completeness, as if a piece of himself that he had not known was missing had suddenly clicked into place. The days began to blend together in a strange, suspended reality. Patrick's ranch hands came and went, never suspecting that their boss was harboring anyone. Grace spent most of her time in the garden or in the house, always careful to stay out of sight. In the evenings, after the workday was done, she and Patrick would cook together, eat together, talk together. They began to establish routines and rhythms, small habits that felt natural and right. Grace taught Patrick about plants and traditional remedies. Patrick taught Grace to read better, improving her English literacy with books from his small collection. They would sit by the fire, Grace sounding out words while Patrick listened with patient encouragement. When she got frustrated, he would make her laugh with silly stories or by purposely pronouncing words wrong until she corrected him with exasperated amusement. A week passed, then two. Patrick knew they could not continue like this forever, that they needed to make real decisions about Grace's future, but he found himself reluctant to push the conversation. The truth was, he was growing accustomed to having her there, more than accustomed. He was beginning to depend on her presence in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. He noticed small things about her. The way she hummed under her breath when she was concentrating on something. The way she always tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was nervous. The way her entire face would light up when she smiled, which was happening more frequently as the days went by. He found himself thinking about her constantly, even when he was out working with the cattle, wondering what she was doing, if she was safe, if she was thinking about him too. For her part, Grace was experiencing emotions she had never felt before. She had known men in her tribe, had even been courted by a few warriors, but none of them had made her feel the way Patrick did. He was gentle and thoughtful, always considering her feelings and her comfort. He never made her feel lesser because she was Apache or because she was a woman. He treated her as an equal, someone whose opinions and knowledge mattered. She caught herself watching him sometimes, admiring the way he moved with quiet confidence, the way his hands looked when he was working, the way his face softened when he smiled. She found herself wanting to make him smile, wanting to hear his laugh, wanting to be the reason for his happiness. It scared her, these feelings, because she knew they complicated everything. She was supposed to be figuring out how to leave, how to start a new life somewhere else. But the thought of leaving Patrick made her heart ache in ways that had nothing to do with her grief over her lost family. It was on the 16th day that everything changed. Patrick had gone into town to buy supplies, leaving Grace alone at the ranch. She spent the morning in the garden, tending to the plants and enjoying the warm sun on her face. She was kneeling by the tomato plants when she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. Horses, multiple horses, and they were coming from the east, from the direction of the mountains where her people roamed. Grace dropped the basket she had been filling and ran to the house, her heart pounding. She peered out through a crack in the shutters and felt her breath catch. There were 5 riders, and even from a distance she could tell they were Apache. She recognized one of them immediately, a warrior named Gray Wolf, who had been her brother's closest friend. He must have seen her tracks or gotten word somehow that she was still alive. They were riding straight for the ranch house, and there was nowhere for her to run. Even if she tried to flee, they would catch her easily. Grace's mind raced through her options. She could hide, but if they searched the house they would find her. She could try to talk to them, but what would she say? That she had been staying with a white man. They would think the worst, that she had betrayed her people, that she had become a traitor. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and Grace made her decision. She stepped out onto the porch, standing tall despite the fear coursing through her veins. Better to face them with dignity than to be found cowering like a frightened rabbit. The 5 warriors reined in their horses about 20 yards from the house, their faces hard and unreadable. Gray Wolf dismounted and approached slowly, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "Gentle Doe," he said, using her Apache name, "we have been searching for you. We thought you were dead." "I am not dead, as you can see," Grace said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Why have you come here?" "We tracked you from the river," Gray Wolf said, his eyes scanning the ranch with obvious suspicion. "Your trail led here to this white man's home. What are you doing in this place, gentle doe? Who lives here?" Grace lifted her chin. "A man who helped me when I had nowhere else to go. A man who gave me food and shelter when I was ready to die. That is who lives here." The other warriors muttered among themselves, and one of them, a young man called Swift Arrow, said loudly, "She has been living with a white man. This is a great dishonor. She should be punished." "Silence," Gray Wolf said sharply. He studied Grace with narrowed eyes. "Is this true? You have been living here with one of them?" "Yes," Grace said, refusing to show shame. "He found me by the river the night after my father and brother died. He offered me sanctuary, and I accepted. He has been nothing but kind and respectful to me. He is a good man." "There are no good white men," Gray Wolf said, but there was less certainty in his voice than Grace expected. "They have killed our people, stolen our lands. How can you stand there and defend one of them?" "Not all white men are the same, just as not all Apache are the same," Grace shot back. "Patrick Thompson is different. He sees me as a person, not as an enemy. He helped me when he could have killed me or left me to die. That should count for something." Gray Wolf looked troubled. Before he could respond, one of the other warriors pointed toward the eastern trail. "Someone is coming." Grace's heart sank as she saw the dust cloud in the distance. Patrick was returning from town. She stepped forward urgently. "Please, Gray Wolf, do not hurt him. He does not deserve to die for showing kindness." "We will see what kind of man he is," Gray Wolf said grimly. The warriors remounted and formed a loose circle around the ranch house, their weapons ready but not yet drawn. They waited in tense silence as the dust cloud grew closer. Patrick saw the Apache warriors before he reached the ranch, and his first thought was for Grace. Was she safe? Had they hurt her? His hand went to his gun, but he knew that drawing it would only ensure his death. He was one man against 5 warriors. His only hope was to talk his way out of this. As he rode into the yard, he saw Grace standing on the porch looking terrified but unharmed. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by determination. Whatever happened, he would protect her. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I am Patrick Thompson," he said clearly. "This is my ranch. I mean you no harm." Gray Wolf urged his horse forward a few steps. "You have been harboring one of our women." "Why?" Patrick glanced at Grace, then back at Gray Wolf. "Because she needed help, and it was the right thing to do. I found her by the river, grieving and alone. I could not leave her there." "You expect us to believe you did this out of kindness," Swift Arrow said mockingly. "White men do nothing without expecting something in return. What did you take from her?" Patrick felt anger flash through him at the implication. "I took nothing from her except the satisfaction of knowing I did what my conscience demanded. Grace has been safe here. She has been treated with respect. You can ask her yourself." All eyes turned to Grace. She stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "It is true. Patrick has been nothing but honorable. He gave me shelter when I had none, food when I was starving, and kindness when I had lost everything. He asked for nothing in return. He even offered to help me find a new life somewhere safe." The warriors exchanged glances. This was clearly not what they had expected to find. Gray Wolf studied Patrick with shrewd eyes. "You speak pretty words, white man, but words mean nothing. Actions speak truth." "Then judge me by my actions," Patrick said steadily. "I could have killed Grace when I found her. I could have turned her over to the army for a reward. I could have taken advantage of her vulnerability in 100 different ways. I did none of those things. I helped her because it was right." Gray Wolf was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "The sun will rise tomorrow morning. We will make camp nearby and watch through the night. At sunrise, we will return with a decision about what should happen to you both. If you are wise, you will not try to run or do anything foolish. We are watching." Patrick nodded slowly. "We will be here." The warriors rode off toward a stand of cottonwood trees about half a mile away, leaving Patrick and Grace alone. As soon as they were out of earshot, Grace rushed down from the porch. "Patrick, I am so sorry. I never meant to bring this danger to you." "This is not your fault," Patrick said firmly. He wanted nothing more than to pull her into his arms to comfort her, but he held back, conscious of the watching warriors. "Come inside. We need to talk about what to do." They went into the house, and Patrick immediately began checking his ammunition and making sure his rifle was clean and ready. Grace watched him with growing distress. "What are you doing? You cannot fight them, Patrick. They will kill you." "I am preparing for any possibility," Patrick said. "But I do not plan to fight unless they force me to." He set down the rifle and turned to face her fully. "Grace, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What do you want to happen here? Do you want to go back with your people?" Grace felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I do not know if they will even let me go back. Grey Wolf spoke of my presence here as a dishonor. They might decide I am no longer one of them." "That is not what I asked," Patrick said gently. He stepped closer to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What do you want, Grace? Forget about what they want or what anyone else thinks. What does your heart tell you?" Grace looked up at him, and suddenly all the feelings she had been holding back came rushing to the surface. "My heart tells me that I do not want to leave you," she whispered. "That these past weeks have been the happiest I have been since before my mother died. That when I think about going away and never seeing you again, it hurts worse than anything. But I am afraid, Patrick. I am afraid of what these feelings mean, of what they could cost both of us." Patrick's breath caught. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "I feel the same way," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you by that river, Grace. Maybe that makes me foolish or crazy, but I cannot help it. You have become the most important person in my life." "Patrick," Grace breathed, and then she was in his arms, holding him tight, feeling his heart beating against hers. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, drawing strength and comfort from the contact. When they finally pulled apart, Patrick said, "Whatever happens tomorrow at sunrise, I want you to know something. I will fight for you, Grace. I will fight for us. If your people decide you need to go back with them, I will respect that. But if there is any way for us to be together, I will find it." "And if they decide you must die for helping me?" Grace asked, fear making her voice shake. "Then at least I will die knowing I did something truly good with my life," Patrick said simply. "I have no regrets, Grace. Not one." They spent the night preparing for every possibility. Patrick wrote letters to his sisters just in case. Grace gathered some of her mother's medicines from the garden, small treasures that might be useful. They ate a quiet dinner, neither of them very hungry but both trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. As night deepened, they sat by the fire, Grace curled against Patrick's side, his arm around her shoulders. They did not talk much, just took comfort in each other's presence. At some point, Grace fell asleep, exhausted by emotion and fear. Patrick carefully lifted her and carried her to the bedroom, laying her gently on the bed and covering her with blankets. He stood there for a moment, looking down at her peaceful face, and felt his heart swell with a love so intense it almost hurt. He went back to the main room and tried to sleep by the fire, but rest eluded him. He kept thinking about all the possible outcomes of tomorrow's meeting. Would the warriors demand Grace's return? Would they want revenge for the perceived dishonor? Would there be any way to convince them that what he and Grace felt for each other was real and worth protecting? As the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Patrick heard movement in the bedroom. Grace emerged, looking pale but determined. "They will come soon," she said. "I know," Patrick replied. He stood and went to her, taking both her hands in his. "Grace, before they get here, I need to say this. Whatever happens today, I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest gift of my life. You have brought light and warmth into a world that was getting darker and colder. You have reminded me what it means to truly care about someone beyond myself." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You have given me hope when I thought hope was dead. You have shown me that kindness and goodness still exist in this world. I love you, Patrick Thompson. I love you with everything I am." They kissed then, a kiss that held all the longing and fear and love they had been holding back. It was gentle and fierce all at once, a promise and a prayer. When they finally broke apart, they heard the sound of horses approaching. They went outside together, hand in hand, and watched as the 5 warriors rode up in the soft dawn light. Gray Wolf dismounted, and the others followed. The Apache warrior's face was grave as he approached, but Patrick thought he saw something that might have been respect in his eyes. "We have discussed this matter through the night," Gray Wolf said formally. "We have considered many things: the honor of our people, the safety of Gentle Doe, the actions of this white man, and we have reached a decision." Patrick felt Grace's hand tighten on his, and he squeezed back reassuringly. "We are listening," he said. Gray Wolf looked at Grace. "You have suffered much, Gentle Doe. You have lost your father, your brother, your mother. You are the last of your family line. This is a heavy burden to carry." He paused. "In our law, when a woman has no male relatives to protect her, she may choose her own path. She may join another family, or she may marry into another tribe. Or she may do something else entirely if she has the courage." Hope flickered in Grace's chest. "What are you saying, Gray Wolf?" "I am saying that we will not force you to return with us," Gray Wolf said. "You are free to make your own choice. If you wish to stay with this white man, we will not prevent it. But you must understand what this means. If you choose his world over ours, you will no longer be fully Apache in the eyes of our people. You will be something in between, belonging fully to neither world." "I understand," Grace said, though her voice wavered slightly. Gray Wolf turned his attention to Patrick. "And you, Patrick Thompson. If you take Gentle Doe as your woman, you become responsible for her safety, her happiness, her life. This is not a small thing. The path before you will be difficult. Your people will judge you. Our people will watch you with suspicion. There will be danger from both sides." "I know," Patrick said firmly, "and I accept that responsibility gladly. I will protect Grace with my life. I will honor her and care for her and do everything in my power to make her happy." Gray Wolf nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled a leather cord from around his neck, from which hung a small stone carved with symbols. "This was my mother's," he said, handing it to Grace. "She was wise and brave, much like your own mother. I give it to you now as a blessing and a protection. May it remind you of who you are and where you come from, no matter what path you walk." Grace took the stone with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Gray Wolf. This means more than you know." Swift Arrow, the young warrior who had been most hostile, spoke up. "I still do not like this, but I respect your courage, Gentle Doe, and yours, white man. Perhaps you are not like the others. Time will tell." The warriors mounted their horses. Gray Wolf looked down at them from his horse and said, "We will spread word among our people that Gentle Doe lives and has chosen her path freely. This should protect you from reprisals from our warriors. But be careful, both of you. There are many in this territory, both white and Apache, who will not understand or accept what you have chosen. Keep your wits sharp and your weapons close. "We will," Patrick promised. "Thank you for your understanding. Thank you for giving us a chance." Gray Wolf nodded once more, then wheeled his horse around. The 5 warriors rode off toward the east, their silhouettes gradually disappearing into the rising sun. Patrick and Grace stood there watching until they were completely out of sight, then turned to each other. "We did it," Grace said wonderingly. "They let me stay, they gave us their blessing." "Not quite a blessing," Patrick said with a slight smile, "more like a cautious acceptance, but I will take it." He pulled her close. "You are sure about this, Grace? You are sure you want to stay here with me?" "This life I am offering is not going to be easy. We will face prejudice and danger. Some people will never accept us being together." "I am sure," Grace said firmly. "I have lost too much already to let fear take this away from me too. I want to build a life with you, Patrick. A life based on love and respect and partnership. Whatever challenges come, we will face them together." They went back inside as the sun continued to rise, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. Patrick made coffee while Grace started breakfast, both of them moving around the kitchen in comfortable synchronization. There was a lightness in the air now that the decision had been made, a sense of possibility that had not been there before. Over the next few weeks, they began to build their life together openly. Patrick explained to his ranch hands that Grace was his wife now, leaving out most of the details of how they had met. Tom and Sam Wilcox were surprised but accepted the news with relatively good grace, though Patrick could see the questions in their eyes. He paid them a small bonus to ensure their discretion about Grace's background, and they seemed to appreciate the gesture. Word gradually spread through the area that Patrick Thompson had taken an Indian wife. The reactions were mixed. Some neighbors stopped visiting altogether, their prejudice too strong to overlook. But others, surprisingly, were more accepting than Patrick had expected. The widow Henderson, who ran the general store in Austin, told Patrick that love was rare enough in this harsh world that it should be celebrated wherever it was found, regardless of circumstance. Grace adapted to her new life with remarkable resilience. She learned to cook in the white style while also teaching Patrick the traditional Apache methods she had grown up with. She tended the garden with dedication, expanding it to include more medicinal plants and vegetables. She learned to sew and mend, to manage household accounts, to do all the things that were expected of a frontier wife. But she also maintained her Apache identity in small but important ways. She wore her hair in the traditional style when they were home alone. She spoke her language to the plants in the garden and sang the old songs while she worked. She taught Patrick words and phrases in Apache, wanting him to understand this part of her heritage. And Patrick, for his part, encouraged all of it. He wanted Grace to be fully herself, not some diminished version shaped by his expectations or the demands of white society. As summer turned to fall, they settled into their routines. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Grace had a way with the horses that amazed Patrick, a natural understanding that seemed almost mystical. Under her care, a difficult mare that had been giving Patrick trouble for months became calm and tractable. The garden produced bountifully, providing more food than they needed and allowing them to share with neighbors, which helped smooth some of the rougher reactions to their marriage. On a cool October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grace turned to Patrick with a smile that made his heart skip. "I have something to tell you," she said. "What is it?" Patrick asked, taking her hand. "I am with child," Grace said softly. "We are going to have a baby." Patrick felt joy explode through his chest like fireworks. He pulled Grace into his arms, holding her tight, laughing with pure happiness. "A baby," he repeated wonderingly. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Grace asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "I am more than happy," Patrick said. "I am overjoyed. I am terrified. I am grateful beyond words." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently. "Thank you, Grace. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this life, for giving me this incredible gift." They spent the evening making plans and dreaming about the future. They talked about names, about how to prepare the house for a baby, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. Grace wanted to teach their child both Apache and English, to give them the best of both worlds. Patrick wanted to make sure their child grew up knowing love and acceptance, free from the prejudices that had marked their own lives. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grace remained active and healthy, though Patrick fussed over her constantly, always worried that she was doing too much. She would laugh at his concern but secretly loved it, this evidence of his care and devotion. As her belly grew round with their child, Patrick would spend evenings talking to it, telling stories and singing songs, his hand resting gently on Grace's stomach. Winter came, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. They spent the dark evenings by the fire, Grace knitting tiny clothes while Patrick carved a cradle from oak wood. They talked about everything and nothing, building the deep intimacy that comes from truly knowing another person. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, Grace's head on Patrick's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them content in the simple joy of being together. In late February of 1874, on a night when the wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows, Grace went into labor. Patrick had arranged for a midwife from town, a practical woman named Mrs. Douglas, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. She arrived just after midnight and took charge with calm efficiency. Patrick was banished to the main room while the birth happened in the bedroom. He paced like a caged animal, flinching at every sound, terrified and useless. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. He prayed more than he had prayed in years, making desperate bargains with God to keep Grace and the baby safe. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, he heard it. The thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. Patrick's legs almost gave out with relief. A moment later, Mrs. Douglas emerged from the bedroom, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Congratulations, Mr. Thompson. You have a son, and your wife is tired but well." Patrick rushed into the bedroom. Grace was propped up against pillows, looking exhausted and radiant all at once. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. As Patrick approached, she pulled back the cloth to reveal their son, a perfect little being with a shock of dark hair and skin that was a beautiful blend of both parents. "Meet your son," Grace said softly, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Patrick reached out with trembling hands to touch the baby's tiny fingers. The infant wrapped his hand around Patrick's finger, and the gesture nearly broke him with its simple power. "He is perfect," Patrick whispered. "You are perfect. I love you both so much." They named him Samuel, after Patrick's father, with the middle name Neshota, which meant twin in Apache, because Grace said he seemed to carry both their spirits within him. Little Samuel was a good baby, calm and alert, watching the world with dark, intelligent eyes. Grace nursed him while singing Apache lullabies, and Patrick would sit nearby, marveling at the small miracle they had created together. As Samuel grew, it became clear he would indeed bridge both worlds. He had his mother's eyes and her connection to nature, but his father's stubbornness and determination. By the time he was walking, he was following Patrick around the ranch, imitating his father's stride and trying to help with the chores. And he would sit for hours in the garden with Grace, learning the names and properties of plants, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. The years flowed by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Patrick expanded the ranch, hiring more workers and increasing the herd. Grace became known throughout the region for her healing skills, people coming from miles around seeking her remedies for various ailments. She helped them all without judgment or expectation of payment, though many brought food or other goods in gratitude. Their relationship with the Apache bands in the area remained complex, but generally peaceful. Gray Wolf visited occasionally, bringing news and checking on Grace. He watched Samuel grow with approval, seeing in the boy a potential bridge between the two worlds. Other warriors came from time to time as well, and Grace would feed them and share news from the white settlements. She became an informal liaison, helping to prevent misunderstandings that might lead to violence. But not everything was peaceful. There were incidents over the years. A group of drunken cowboys caused trouble at the ranch one night, shouting slurs and making threats. Patrick faced them down with his rifle, making it clear they were not welcome. The widow Henderson's store was vandalized by someone who did not approve of her friendship with an Indian woman. And once, a young Apache warrior, not from Gray Wolf's band, tried to convince Grace to leave Patrick and return to her people, believing she had been corrupted by white ways. She sent him away firmly but kindly, explaining that her place was with her husband and son. Through all of it, Patrick and Grace's love only deepened. They learned to communicate almost without words, to anticipate each other's needs and moods. They developed private jokes and rituals, small moments of intimacy that belonged only to them. On warm summer nights, they would lie on a blanket in the garden, looking at the stars, while Grace told Patrick the Apache stories about the constellations, and Patrick shared the scientific explanations he had learned from books. Neither set of stories was more true than the other, they decided. They were just different ways of understanding the same beautiful mystery. When Samuel was 5 years old, Grace became pregnant again. This time, with the knowledge and experience of their first child, they approached the pregnancy with more confidence and less anxiety. Their daughter was born on a crisp autumn morning, arriving so quickly that Mrs. Douglas barely made it in time. They named her Rose Marie, Rose after Patrick's mother and Marie from a French word that Grace liked the sound of. Rose was different from Samuel from the start. Where he had been calm and observant, she was fiery and demanding, letting everyone know exactly what she wanted at top volume. Grace laughed and said she had her father's determination, and her own stubbornness doubled. Patrick said she was perfect exactly as she was. As the children grew, Patrick and Grace worked hard to give them the best of both cultures. They taught them to ride and shoot, to track animals and read the weather, to work hard and treat everyone with respect. Grace taught them her language and the old stories, the traditional crafts and the proper way to give thanks to the earth for its gifts. Patrick taught them to read and write English, to do arithmetic, to understand the white man's laws and ways. It was not always easy. Samuel struggled in school when Patrick enrolled him, facing cruelty from other children who called him names and refused to play with him. Patrick wanted to pull him out, to teach him at home where he would be safe, but Grace insisted he needed to learn to navigate both worlds. "He will face this his whole life," she told Patrick. "Better he learns now how to stand proud despite it." So Samuel learned to hold his head high, to ignore the slurs, to prove himself through his actions rather than his words. By the time he was 10, many of his classmates had come to respect him, won over by his kindness and his willingness to help anyone who needed it. He had his father's strong moral compass and his mother's generous spirit, and it showed in everything he did. Rose, when her time came to start school, faced similar challenges but handled them differently. Where Samuel had endured with quiet dignity, Rose fought back with fierce words and, occasionally, her fists. Patrick was called to the school more than once to collect his daughter after she had bloodied some boy's nose for calling her a half-breed. Grace would scold her, but Patrick could see she was secretly proud of Rose's fighting spirit. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the steady accumulation of small moments that make up a life. Birthdays and holidays, illnesses and recoveries, triumphs and disappointments. Through it all, Patrick and Grace remained each other's anchor and support. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they never lost sight of the love that had brought them together. When Patrick was 45 and Grace 43, Samuel left home to attend college in Austin, determined to become a lawyer who could help protect the rights of Native people. It was bittersweet watching him go, pride mixed with the ache of loss. Rose, at 17, was already talking about becoming a teacher, wanting to help other children like herself who straddled two worlds. On a warm evening in late spring of 1886, Patrick and Grace sat on the porch swing he had built years ago, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. They were older now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces, but their hands still fit together perfectly. Their bodies still curved toward each other with the unconscious ease of long familiarity. "You remember the night we met?" Grace asked, her head resting on Patrick's shoulder. "Every detail," Patrick said. "I remember how you looked by the river, so lost and heartbroken. I remember being terrified when the warriors came. I remember the moment I realized I loved you." "I knew I loved you the day you taught me to read," Grace said. "The way you were so patient, so encouraging. The way you never made me feel stupid for not knowing things. That was when I knew you saw me as your equal, not as something lesser." "You have never been lesser," Patrick said firmly. "You are the strongest, wisest, most remarkable person I have ever known. You took the worst tragedy of your life and turned it into something beautiful. You built a family from ashes. You created a home where two worlds meet and blend. That takes courage beyond anything I can imagine." Grace turned to look at him, her dark eyes still as beautiful as they had been 13 years ago by the river. "We built that together, my love. You were willing to risk everything for me, a stranger from a people you had been taught to fear. You opened your heart and your home. You gave me a reason to keep living when I wanted to die. Everything good in my life since that night exists because of your kindness." They kissed, a gentle kiss full of love and history and promise. As they pulled apart, Patrick said, "I have been thinking. With the children growing up and leaving home, maybe we should travel a bit. I know you have always wanted to see the ocean, and I would like to take you to meet my sisters in St. Louis. They have been asking for years." Grace smiled. "I would like that. Though I confess the ocean terrifies me a little. So much water all in one place. Then we will face that fear together, like we have faced everything else," Patrick said. They spent the evening making plans, dreaming about the future as they had done so many times before. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they went inside to the home they had built together, a home filled with love and laughter, and the beautiful complexity of two lives fully intertwined. Years continued to flow past like the Colorado River that had been the site of their first meeting. Samuel became a successful lawyer, indeed defending Native rights and working to ensure fair treatment under the law. He married a kind woman named Elizabeth, who accepted his mixed heritage without question, and they had 3 children who visited the ranch regularly, filling it with noise and joy. Rose became a teacher as she had planned, opening a small school that welcomed children of all backgrounds. She never married, claiming she was too busy with her students to bother with men, though Patrick suspected she simply had not found anyone who could match her fierce spirit. She lived in Austin but visited the ranch every Sunday for dinner, regaling them with stories of her students and their progress. Patrick and Grace did travel to see the ocean, taking a trip to Galveston when they were both in their 50s. Grace stood on the beach with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the vastness and beauty of it. They also visited St. Louis, where Patrick's sisters welcomed Grace with open arms and genuine warmth. Elizabeth and Mary had worried for years that their brother was lonely on his isolated ranch, and they were overjoyed to see how happy he was with Grace. As they aged, Patrick and Grace slowed down but never stopped. They still worked the ranch together, though they hired younger people to do the heaviest labor. They still tended the garden together, though Grace needed Patrick's help standing up after kneeling too long. They still talked long into the night by the fire, though they sometimes fell asleep in their chairs before making it to bed. On their 20th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Samuel and Elizabeth came with their children. Rose came with a group of her favorite students. Even Gray Wolf appeared, now an old man himself, bringing gifts and blessings. They feasted on food from both cultures, sharing stories and laughter late into the night. As Patrick looked around at the gathering, at the beautiful blending of traditions and peoples, at the love that flowed so freely, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. This life that had begun with such tragedy and uncertainty had blossomed into something more wonderful than he could have imagined. He caught Grace's eye across the crowded room and saw that she felt the same way. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Patrick and Grace walked out to the garden in the moonlight. It was their favorite spot, the place where they had first really talked, where Grace had begun to heal, where they had started building their life together. "I want you to know something," Patrick said, taking Grace's hands in his. "If I could go back to that night by the river and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Every challenge we faced, every hardship we endured, it was all worth it to have this life with you." Grace squeezed his hands, her eyes bright with tears. "You saved my life that night, Patrick. But more than that, you gave me a reason to live. You showed me that love can bridge any divide, that family is what you build, not just what you are born into, that hope can grow even in the darkest soil. I am so grateful for every day we have had together." They stood there in the moonlight, two people who had defied expectations and overcome obstacles to build something beautiful. Around them, the garden grew lush and full, a living testament to what could be created when you tend something with love and patience. Above them, the stars shone bright and endless, watching over them as they had watched over countless lovers throughout time. Patrick and Grace continued to thrive as they moved into their 60s. Their love, tested by time and trial, had only grown stronger and deeper. They had built not just a home but a legacy, not just a family but a bridge between two worlds that desperately needed connection. When Patrick was 67 and Grace 65, Patrick fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. For days he burned with fever while Grace sat by his bedside, using every remedy she knew, refusing to leave his side. She sang to him in Apache, whispered to him in English, begged him not to leave her. The children came, gathering around their father's bed, but it was Grace's voice that finally called him back from the edge. When the fever broke and Patrick opened his eyes to see Grace's exhausted, tear-stained face, he smiled weakly. "You are not getting rid of me that easily," he whispered. Grace laughed through her tears and kissed his forehead. "Good, because I am not done with you yet." It took weeks for Patrick to fully recover, but throughout it all, Grace was there. She fed him broth when he was too weak to hold a spoon. She read to him when he was bored with lying in bed. She held him when nightmares from the fever haunted his sleep. And through it all, Patrick was reminded again of how blessed he was to have found this woman, to have built a life with her. As Patrick regained his strength, he and Grace talked about the future. They decided to officially hand over the running of the ranch to Samuel and his family, who would move into the main house while Patrick and Grace built a smaller cabin nearby. They wanted to spend their remaining years in peace, tending the garden, enjoying their grandchildren, and simply being together without the constant demands of ranch work. The cabin they built was small but perfect, with a large window overlooking the garden and a porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. They filled it with books and mementos from their years together, creating a cozy nest that was entirely their own. The grandchildren loved to visit, climbing into their laps for stories about the old days, learning the lessons that only grandparents can teach. On a golden afternoon in October of 1899, as the new century approached, Patrick and Grace celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary. They sat on their cabin porch, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Samuel and Elizabeth had brought all three of their children, and Rose had come as well, as she always did for important family occasions. "We have built something good," Grace said softly, watching the children laugh and play together. "We have built something extraordinary," Patrick corrected gently. "We took pain and loss and turned it into love and family. We proved that people from different worlds can not only coexist but thrive together. That is no small thing, Grace." "No," she agreed. "It is not a small thing at all." As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink that reminded Patrick of the sunset on the night they met, the whole family gathered for dinner. They shared food and stories, laughter and love. The youngest grandchild, barely 3 years old, climbed into Grace's lap and fell asleep there, his small hand clutching her finger. Patrick looked at his wife holding their grandchild, her face soft with love, and felt his heart swell until it seemed it might burst. This woman, who had been a stranger crying by a river 26 years ago, was now the center of his universe, the reason for his happiness, the best decision he had ever made. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Patrick and Grace lay in their cabin bedroom, wrapped in each other's arms. "I love you," Patrick whispered into the darkness. "I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "I love you too," Grace whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, and always. You are my heart, Patrick Thompson." They drifted off to sleep together as they had done for thousands of nights, secure in the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. The years that followed were gentle ones, filled with the quiet joys of a life well lived. Patrick and Grace grew old together with grace and dignity, their love a constant presence that warmed everyone around them. They remained active and engaged, tending their garden, spending time with family, and continuing to serve as a bridge between the white and Apache communities in the region. When Patrick was 73 and Grace 71, they took one last trip, returning to the spot by the Colorado River where they had first met. It looked much the same as it had all those years ago, though the trees were taller and the landscape had changed in small ways. They stood together on the bank, remembering that night that had changed both their lives. "I was so lost that night," Grace said quietly. "I truly believed my life was over, that there was nothing left for me in this world. And I was so alone," Patrick said. "I did not even realize how alone I was until I met you and discovered what it meant to share life with someone." They stood there for a long time, holding hands and remembering. Then Grace turned to Patrick with a smile. "Come on, old man. Let us go home." "Lead the way, my love," Patrick said, and they walked back to their horses together, ready to return to the life and family they had built. Patrick and Grace lived into their 80s, a remarkable achievement for that era. They remained sharp and engaged until the end, still sitting on their porch every evening to watch the sunset, still holding hands like young lovers, still finding new things to talk about after decades of conversation. When Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, Patrick held her hand through the final night, whispering words of love and comfort. He told her about all the beautiful things they had experienced together, reminded her of their children and grandchildren and the growing number of great-grandchildren. He thanked her for choosing him, for building a life with him, for loving him so completely. "You made me the luckiest man alive," he whispered as dawn broke. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Grace died with a smile on her face, at peace and surrounded by love. The funeral drew people from all over the territory, both white settlers and Apache people coming to pay their respects to a woman who had bridged two worlds with grace and courage. Gray Wolf, ancient but still strong, spoke at the service, telling stories of Grace's bravery and wisdom. Patrick lived for 2 more years after Grace's death, cared for lovingly by Samuel and Elizabeth. He spent his days in the garden, tending the plants that Grace had loved, talking to her as if she was still there. At night, he would sit on the porch and look at the stars, remembering all the evenings they had spent together. On a warm summer evening in 1904, Patrick died peacefully in his sleep, a smile on his face. His children found him the next morning sitting in his porch chair, his face turned toward the east as if watching for something. In his hand was the carved stone that Gray Wolf had given to Grace all those years ago, the blessing and protection that had seen them through so much. They buried Patrick next to Grace on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of both the garden they had tended together and the river where they had first met. The headstone bore both their names and a simple inscription: "Two worlds, one love, forever united." The legacy that Patrick and Grace built lived on through their children and grandchildren. Samuel continued his legal work, fighting for justice and equality. Rose's school grew and thrived, educating generations of children to see past differences to the humanity beneath. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren spread across the territory and beyond, each carrying within them the lesson that love can transcend any barrier, that courage and compassion can change the world. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. The garden that Grace had tended was preserved and maintained, her medicinal plants still growing and being used to help others. And on certain evenings, when the light was just right and the wind whispered through the mesquite trees, people swore they could see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old cabin, holding hands and watching the sunset together, still in love after all these years. The story of Patrick and Grace became a legend in the region, passed down through families both white and Apache. It was a story of courage and compassion, of love that refused to be bound by prejudice or fear. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, even when violence and hatred seem to rule the day, individual acts of kindness and connection can create ripples that spread far and wide, changing lives and building bridges that last for generations. Their great-granddaughter, a writer named Maria, eventually wrote a book about their story, carefully researched and lovingly told. It became a bestseller, inspiring readers around the world with its message of hope and love. People would visit the ranch, now a historical site, to see the cabin and the garden, to stand by the graves on the hill and pay their respects to 2 people who had refused to let the world's divisions keep them apart. And through it all, the essential truth of Patrick and Grace's story remained. That love, real love, is the most powerful force in the world. It can heal wounds, bridge divides, create families, and build futures. It can take a grieving woman by a river and a lonely rancher, and turn their meeting into a story that would inspire people for generations to come. The land that Patrick had owned and built up over the years became a symbol of what could be achieved when people from different backgrounds worked together. The ranch prospered under Samuel's management, and then under his children's care, growing into one of the most successful operations in the region. But more than that, it became a place where people of all backgrounds were welcome, where prejudice was not tolerated, and where the memory of Patrick and Grace's love was honored in everything they did. As the 20th century progressed, and the world changed in ways Patrick and Grace could never have imagined, their story remained relevant. During times of conflict and division, people would remember the cowboy who found a crying Apache girl by the river and chose compassion over fear. They would remember the woman who chose to trust a stranger from a people who had caused her so much pain. And they would remember that love, in its truest form, is always a choice, a decision to see the humanity in another person and to build something beautiful together. The Colorado River still flows past that spot where Patrick found Grace, its waters rushing over stones and carrying leaves and memories downstream. The mesquite trees still grow along its banks, providing shade for travelers and shelter for animals. And somewhere in the whisper of the wind through those trees, in the gurgle of the water over stones, the story of Patrick and Grace lives on, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and change the world. Their love story, which began with grief and uncertainty on a riverbank in 1873, became a legacy that lasted far beyond their lifetimes. It proved that even in the wild and often brutal landscape of the Old West, even in a time of violence and division, love could flourish. It showed that people are more than the labels placed upon them, more than the conflicts that divide them, and that connection and compassion are always possible if we have the courage to reach across the divide. And so the story ends not with death but with life, not with division but with unity, not with despair but with hope. Patrick and Grace found each other in the darkest of times and built something that lasted, something that mattered, something that changed not just their own lives but the lives of everyone they touched. They proved that love, real and true and brave, can indeed conquer all. And that is the greatest legacy of all.